Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Season 3, Episode 27. Thought I'd do something a little different, something that I want to start doing more often on the podcast, a movie review of Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. I'm going to bring a buddy on mine who's shown up for the Four Idiots Discuss Sports podcast, as well as helping me break down the finale of Better Call Saul. My buddy Jason, or sometimes I will refer to him as JB. As always, thank you to all of you, you dear listeners, you loyal listeners, you. Please like, subscribe, thumbs up, give the podcast a review, send to friends, enemies, colleagues, compatriots far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting.
Act 1, a review of Wes Anderson's Asteroid City.
I've done some movie reviews on my own, and although I believe that I'm the most insightful person in the entire world, well, at least that's what my ego believes, sometimes it's nice to have another viewpoint, another personality, another way of seeing things to reflect on not only what exists, but what you've seen to help color the entire picture. That's a long way of me saying, here's my buddy JB back on the podcast to review the latest Wes Anderson film, Asteroid City. JB, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Patrick. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well as well. You and I saw this movie together in Asheville, North Carolina, in an older movie theater, a historic movie theater, and I personally had mixed reviews about it. I believe that you were, at least you had a favorable viewing, if not outright liked the film the first time we both saw it. We've both seen it now a second time. Your reflections on the movie after having seen it for that second time?
Well, so first of all, to go back to Asheville, that first time, first of all, I was playing hurt after a long night the night before. And I think the theater, while quaint and cool, was not quite the modern version of a theater with comfortable chairs and good air conditioning and all of that. So I was compromised a little bit there. After having seen the movie a second time, I liked it the first time in the sense that I found it to be amusing. There were no laugh out loud lines. I wasn't sure that I necessarily got it. I'm still not. But the thing about Wes is from scene to scene to scene, even scenes that are not necessary, they can be amusing and they might make you smile. And so that was my first impression. After having watched it a second time, I think he was going for something more high-level art than he usually does and really trying to tie together his filmography. And I don't know that he landed it, but I liked it more the second time without thinking it's one of his top 5 movies. How's that?
No, so I appreciate everything that you just said. The first point being, I think that the movie, I feel that the three of us, we went with our buddy Doc, the three of us did not have as enjoyable a movie experience for a couple of reasons. This was an older theater, and quaint is a nice way of saying the chairs were uncomfortable. The theater was not as cool as a modern movie theater, whether or not, it's funny because they have much smaller theaters, right? The actual theater is a smaller room, yet very often when you go to these older theaters, they're not as cool as a modern theater. So it's very likely they don't have the kind of air conditioning, or they're not going to upgrade the kind of air conditioning that the modern moviegoer is used to. And the movie, to me, seemed much longer in the first viewing than in the second viewing. I found the movie to be, I just felt like it wasn't ending properly in the first viewing, almost like this would be a good place to end it, and it doesn't. This would be a good place to end it, and then it doesn't end. In the second viewing, I never felt like that. And it was because I had, the luxury of a couch that I was familiar with, cooler air conditioning, that because of the comforts that I was viewing the movie in, I never found myself thinking, when is this going to end? So that's my first point. The second point, and I agree with you 100%, that, and I just realized that one of the conversations you and I have had about the podcast is I say 100% all the time. I just said it. At least there's some recognition there. That's growth. At least when you recognize that you're doing something over and over again, that's growth. Whether or not you actually curb how often you do it, that's another story. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's another way I could say it. That Wes Anderson is going for something much bigger. Whether or not he lands it is debatable, and it's obviously going to be debatable amongst every viewer. I would like to talk more about that, and I'm going to start by saying I found the movie the first time to be completely different than the second time because I recognized, or at least in my second viewing, I accepted, which is probably the better word, that this was a strange presentation of a play, and the story is truly about the making of the play and the characters that make up the play as much as it is the play. And we talked about this very briefly after our first viewing, the breaking of the fourth wall. So you see the majority of the movie as a stage play presented as a movie, where the true underlying story is about the writing, the casting, the rehearsals, and then the running time of the play, though you see much of that laid out in the movie that is the play. Would you agree with that? Does that make sense how I'm presenting it?
It makes sense, and I want to talk about it visually because that's the way I kind of talk my way through it. You've got the color version of what's happening. So the events and the plot that is occurring within color, for me, is Asteroid City, the movie. And then you've got two sections that are black and white, one of which is the conception and making of the play, and the other one almost feels like a TV show version of the play. So I feel like we've got three different productions going on. And when we watched it in Asheville, one of the reasons I felt similar to you in that that feeling of, well, he just kind of kept tacking things on at the end, but he wasn't really tacking things on. It was more of a Russian doll circumstance where from the beginning, he takes the Russian doll apart, and then as he goes through the process, he's putting it back together. And so that's a long way of me saying, I get what you were saying, but I really conceptualized it as movie, color, and then the creation of the play, and then kind of the TV show as the three elements of art that are being portrayed.
Okay, I like that because it differs from what my viewing was. Asteroid City, the color movie, was, in my mind, the play that we would see on stage. What you were categorizing as what you'd call the television show was the behind the scenes of the play as the play was going on. And then you had this third layer, which was the foundational layer, which was the cast of characters leading up to the play. So that's the playwright, then what you call the lead actor, and then the other actors and actresses that were incorporated into the casting of the play over time based on what we find out later in the movie. And here's where I could say, spoiler alert, if you're ever going to see this movie and you don't want it spoiled for you, stop listening now, come back to this. This is at approximately 8.5 minutes, 9 minutes into the podcast. So spoiler alert, right? The playwright goes to one of these, looks like, I wouldn't call it like an acting school. It's almost like it's a mastermind, a liberal arts mastermind of actors and actresses that are not only trying to work on their craft, but work on the ideas of presentation of stage art. And this is where one of the layers comes in. So you've got this whole scene where you can't wake up if you don't fall asleep. And in my mind, seeing it for the second time, Jason, that's what the entire movie was about. It was not only a reflection on Wes Anderson's filmography, but on art itself. That what this is, it's all an illusion. So the foundational piece being you seeing the playwright go through writing the play and then the inception of having to cast it, that is an illusion. And then the second part of the illusion is behind the stage. And then the third part of the illusion is the movie itself, which is a color representation in movie format of the play that was on stage. At least this is my interpretation. Within all of those layers, they don't work unless they work. That unless you buy the illusion of what's happening, they don't work. And I thought the second time I saw it, it was brilliant because in the very movie that you're watching, which is a representation in movie format of a play, which is a play that you're seeing the behind the scenes of, not only while it's going on, but in its foundation, people within this illusory paradigm are questioning the paradigm, right? You're
Right.
seeing them question the paradigm in real time. What the hell is this play about? What is my character about? Does this even work? Is it coming together? And the resolution to that is, in many ways, it's irrelevant. Just keep telling the story.
Which Brody says to Augie at some point, right?
Yes.
Adrian Brody's character.
Yes, Adrian Brody's character as the director, right? Although we have to piece that together in the film, Adrian Brody's character as the director going through the things that he's going through in his life, his personal life,
Right?
continues with this mantra, it doesn't matter whether or not it works, just keep telling the story. And that's what Wes does in this movie, and I think that is a commentary on his own movies. It may not look like it works, but this is truly Wes Anderson. You sent me that clip of the Saturday Night Live spoof of a Wes Anderson horror movie and how all of the different paces that you find in a Wes Anderson film, if you put it into a horror movie, how hilarious it would be. You know a Wes Anderson film when you see it. And the illusion of it, you have to buy into or you don't, right? There's a lot of people who don't like Wes Anderson as a filmmaker, as an auteur. So is he actually tongue-in-cheek reflecting on his own filmography saying, look, you either buy this and this works for you or it doesn't? Because if you don't go to sleep, then you can't ever wake up.
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I think he's tongue-in-cheek commenting on his filmography and saying, hey, you think I make a lot of reference, watch this. But I also think he's doing what you were saying he's doing, which is to take the conceptualization of art from its beginning, seeing it through to what you might think is the end piece, or the studio might think is the end piece, or the theater manager might think is the end piece, and then bringing it back. And there's also some pratfalls or some things that don't continue. One of the things that I found most moving about the movie on the rewatch was the Margot Robbie character, who is part of the play initially and then gets cut out. And she reminds Augie of that when they're having that conversation, she on one balcony, he on another. And then you talk about how the mother figure is cut out of the movie because she's dead. And that's another way of him playing with the timelines and with the different structures.
I love that observation, and here's the reason why. It was a very emotional scene between the two actors and actresses in the moment of the scene, right? It's almost like she was reminding him of the bond that they had and the way it was expressed in the play to remind him of his purpose in that play. And they had a moment together, and then, of course, because they're actors, they immediately snap out of it, right? They
Yep.
snap out, and then they go back into the reality of what they're doing. I'm still in this play. You're in a different production, in a different capacity. Hey, what's going on with that? And so in that moment, it struck me they both went to sleep because they were both in the moment where they had that moving scene of, I'm dead, you're remembering me, maybe in a dream, maybe it's not a dream, and I'm giving you this prophetic or profound guidance as someone you loved who passed away and who's in this other spiritual realm trying to guide you through what is this very difficult time in your terrestrial life. In that moment,
he really puts his finger down on it, too, his thumb down on it, because everybody in the movie, all the characters have a name, except for Margot. She's billed in the movie as the actress.
That's a great point, because the wife is never referred to by her first name. And let's take that to the next degree, where you've got the father always referring to his daughter as my daughter. He never speaks her name, right?
That's right.
So it's a very interesting way to present a character that really is central to the entire plot of the movie, and yet it's her presence, her persona is never labeled.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, and I don't have the TV in front of me. I'm wondering if her name is on the Tupperware.
Oh, that's interesting.
There's a piece of tape on the Tupperware, but I can't remember.
No, I don't remember either, and maybe it is. That's a, that's one of those things where it may be a little nod and a wink type thing in a movie that I'm never aware of because I don't spend the time to go and look at it that way. And I don't know that you will either. Maybe we can, in 2 or 3 weeks, look that up on the internet and somebody will have gone and done that research. So I wanted to talk about also in this really, I would say crowded movie is maybe the best way to say it. But, most of Wes Anderson's movies are crowded in a way. They have a lot of different characters and it's easy to call them busy, right? It's a very busy universe that Wes Anderson builds in his movies, which I do believe is a reflection on how he sees our world and how we operate in our world. We're always so very busy. The difference between this movie and some of his other movies is I feel like in that busyness, some of the what you'd call ancillary characters have a chance to breathe and really express themselves in the overall or the broader story of what's happening in the movie. And in this one, it didn't feel that way. It felt like it was a little cramped, that he didn't have, whether it be the vision or whether it was intentional or whether or not it's, you and I have talked about this, it's a Quentin Tarantino type thing, and Patton Oswalt has made comments about it, whether or not he didn't have the right editor to make it all work, right? Because men in particular want to shoot just over and over scenes and different ways of viewing a scene, and then you have this massive scope of a movie and you need a really good editor to put it all together and to have it make sense. Did you feel like, although it was hitting all of those Wes Anderson paces, it was busy, there were a lot of characters, do you feel like that all came together, that every character had a place in the movie, had room to breathe, and was able to express him or herself in the overall or overarching story?
Yes and no. I don't think, first of all, I do feel it's cramped, and I don't think everybody got kind of a big enough bite at the apple necessarily, but that worked for me. Because I think part of the crampedness of it speaks to, the production and what was going on universally during the production. This was a movie shot during COVID. And it also is a movie that has 2 separate quarantines or lockdowns because of the space alien coming down. And so I felt like he wanted to chalk as many people into this, give them times to be amusing, but also to feel the claustrophobia of being in a quarantined circumstance. And that's why I feel like it's cramped, but I think it's purposeful.
Okay, I did not... That is brilliant, because this movie was made during quarantine, and it just, now that you say that, what comes through me immediately is one of the goofier scenes in the movie, yet it lands in my mind perfectly, where they're at the table, the kids, the teacher is trying to go back into her regular lesson plan, they're quarantined, the parents are all sitting in what you can see is one of those old single wide trailers that you have out in the desert, and they're all cramped in that thing because they want to see their kids, but they can't because the kids are in quarantine. And then they have that goofy song and dance routine, which is, it was goofy the second time. I thought maybe I would appreciate it differently the second time. It was still goofy and awkward, and yet when you see the parents looking through the television, and that's what their kids have become, I guess is kind of the look of both awe and horror that you see on the faces of the parents. That's what's going on inside of the quarantine.
Right.
It's a great reflection on what the bubble must have looked like if someone could have stepped out of it and looked at quarantine from a bird's eye view, 360 degrees.
Yeah.
So I didn't look at it that, and this is why I wanted to have you on the podcast, to get these types of perspectives, because that is a great reflection on what quarantine must be like to people who aren't quarantined, but in a way they were quarantined because they were all stuffed inside of that single wide trying to make communication with their kids. Your thoughts?
No, exactly. It also frames some of the conversations, right? So Midge and Augie aren't necessarily intense, but they're in those cabins and they're forced to be there. And some of the most poignant moments to me are them talking to each other through those windows, which also adds framing, which I thought was kind of beautiful as well. But then to go back to the crampedness, we have that opening scene with, is it Matt Dillon? And he's the mechanic. I think there was a sign that says "Death rides on unsafe tires."
Yes.
That's a 4-minute scene that sets us up with him. And then his only other scene in the movie is doing the audio visual for the parents who are in that double wide to see their children within the quarantine camp.
Right. I think the only other thing that he does besides that is he sprays some water on that, imaginary car part after the alien comes back the second time. Right.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So it's almost like every one of the characters, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. We go through these experiences in life, and this is where I think that it was a commentary on our modern society. You have something as awe-inspiring and mind-blowing and revolutionary as an alien coming to Earth. And the second time the alien comes to Earth, everybody kind of reverts back not only to who they were prior to the alien ever landing, but a more primal, I think you could even say primitive version of that person. And the juxtaposition is, look at how revolutionary and progressive and different this circumstance is, and it drives us to do what? To go back not only into, I don't know, I want to say the worst version of ourselves, but the most comfortable version of ourselves. But then we even reduce it by 25 or 50%. It gets more primitive. Did you see that? Was that part of how you saw like the alien coming back for the second time?
I didn't pick up on it. I was wondering if you had an example of maybe one of the main characters and kind of to frame it for me.
If you remember, not only does Matt Dillon, he starts spraying that car part starts exploding again. He starts spraying it with water. And then I'm not going to remember everybody's name, but it's Liev Schreiber who starts shooting off his son's death ray. Do you remember
that's
that?
Right, yeah.
And so the general starts going back into his kind of, his manic, like his speech where he's talking about, how he got from point A to point B in his life. And I think you see a lot of the characters start acting through some of the, I don't want to call them the tropes, but whatever their place was in the movie leading up to that scene, they kind of all revert back to it in that panicked mode, right? It's a very frantic scene. And that's what it kind of struck me as. It's like, look at what we're dealing with in modern society, this whole juxtaposition of this guy going and testifying to there being aliens. And what would it mean if that were true? Like, would things really change for us? And because we invest, this is part of my reason why, even if it is true, I don't care. I don't think it is true. But even if it is true, what difference does it make? It doesn't really change our day-to-day lives in any meaningful way. And you saw that represented in the second coming of the alien. And I guess the only real meaningful impact of the alien second coming is everyone realizing that they're going to have to go back into quarantine. Right?
Exactly.
So they all revert back not only to who they were, they don't really see the alien coming back a second time as any type of meaningful, as any type of profound experience. It's just like, how is this going to affect me in the short term? What do you think about that?
Well, what I think about it is, and you and I talked about this, I rewatched some of the filmography. There's rarely any actual growth for Wes Anderson characters. But at the end of the movie, there may be some small, slight transformation. But other than Rushmore, I get the sense that the characters are the same as they were before. Even Tenenbaums, which is I actually liked a lot more watching it the second time this time through. It's darker, and you feel like the lead character and his children change a little bit, but they don't really. And I feel like the same thing happens here. These are all exactly the same people, or they're going to be, when they leave Asteroid City.
That's an interesting reflection. So I'll say this about the Royal Tenenbaums. The character that changes the most is Royal Tenenbaum, right? The father.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
In reconnecting with his kids, and trying to represent some sort of fatherly figure to them in his own broken way over the second or the second half of the movie. And you see some slight change in some of the characters, but the one that's played by Chaz is his name. The character's name is Chaz, and I can't remember the name of the actor that plays him, the comedian.
Keep talking.
All right, yeah, it'll come to both of us. That's, to me, the most growth out of all of the characters is they had the most contentious relationship. They were able to mend it at the very end of the movie. And you see, at least from the perspective of the father of Royal, his contentment that he was able to mend probably the most broken relationship amongst the three children that he had with, it's Ben something, right?
It's Ben Stiller.
Ben Stiller's character. So, but I agree with you that at least in the universe of the movie, you don't see a ton of growth from the other characters, but you see the growth out of these limiting experiences, right? So the Eli character ends up going to Wyoming and being active in his drug rehabilitation clinic, right?
Right.
And that to him is the growth, right? That he's going to go and he's going to dedicate some of his time not being an author and wrapped up in that kind of douchey, progressive, eclectic New York book world. You know, the world of those authors. He's going to go out into this rural area and you know, really embrace sobriety and help other people embrace sobriety. I'm not sure you really see the same thing with Richie and with, oh God, what's the female lead?
Margot.
Margot's character. Although you don't know that they don't start a relationship, right? So that's an interesting one. I think
they absolutely start a relationship. They're in love with each other.
But you don't see that as part of what's on screen. You just see them holding hands, I believe, at the end at Royal's funeral, right?
Well, so where you see them at the end is on the roof, where Margot first started hiding cigarettes as a 12-year-old, and they share cigarettes, and that was not unlike our Better Call Saul pod. That was striking to me. But either way, that doesn't necessarily impact our conversation of Asteroid City. What does is whether or not Wes Anderson characters want to change. Chaz, the Ben Stiller character, seems to have that begrudgingly. And Royal, like you said, really wants to. Here, you've got people like Mitch, who says at one point to Augie, we're just two catastrophically wounded people who don't express the depths of our pain because we don't want to. And there has to be a want to.
And maybe what Wes Anderson is doing and doing so well is expressing throughout the course of his movies the circumstances that drives people to want to change, to make some sort of change. And that's why his movies can be regarded as dark comedies, because a lot of the action is violent. A lot of the drama, the interplay between characters is heartbreaking. And it's like, these are the circumstances that one has to go through before we elect to really evaluate how we're contributing to it and the changes that we need to make to get out of, what can be said, a hole that we've dug for ourselves. And I hadn't thought about it that way. I think you're right. I really feel you're right. You start going through the list of characters that do make the changes, however small, however minor may be represented in the movies. And it's often because of these terrible, terrible circumstances that they faced.
If I were to add on top of that, because one of the things we haven't talked about is we're talking about the artfulness of the three storyline, the fragmented section of this particular movie, Asteroid City, and the commentary that Wes makes with his characters in terms of growing from a place that is maybe harmful, or as Mitch says, again, catastrophically wounded, to some place that is more, comfortable, being comfortable in their own skin. But with all of that, what else you get with his movies is this style, whether it's the intricateness of some of the rooms in Grand Budapest, or whether it's these kind of things that he relies on. Tents, smoking is cool, precocious children, record players, all of these things that he decorates his movies with to get you to where he wants you to go at the end.
Yes, and one of the other things that I noticed, I don't know that it is as much a part of his early films like Bottle Rocket and in particular the Royal Tenenbaums, but the quirky way he represents animals in his movies. Fish, birds, sometimes even dogs and cats. He's got that really where he will often create cartoon versions of the animals that all of the characters in the universe of the story see as real, right? We could see it's a cartoon, and it's almost like that old stop claymation type cartoon or fictional representation, yet within the story, all of the characters see that as authentic. That's a Wes Anderson staple.
Regular. Not weird, just regular.
Right. There's nothing awkward about it. And that juxtaposed with, and I just used the word juxtaposed twice in this podcast, don't think I don't realize it, with the way the alien is represented. I thought it was hilarious the second viewing. I didn't really pick up on it. It was almost, I was in a sense of frustration at this point in the movie in the first viewing. But Jeff Goldblum as the alien questioning, what the hell is this all about? This doesn't even make sense. And in the movie version, which is, of course, the play, you think about how it's represented to all of those characters. It's just like the animals. They don't see it as awkward, but to us as the viewer in the theater, it is. It's almost like, I know that you have adopted the illusion of the story that I'm telling, But even within that, I'm going to give you these Kafkaesque moments where I'm going to fuck with you, and these animals are going to look goofy and out of place, and they really aren't going to work. But within the universe of all the characters, it's completely natural. They see that as a normal fish. They see that as a normal bird.
Yeah, the one I remember from Tenenbaums, I think they had mice, but they were spotted like they were Dalmatians.
Yes.
So odd.
And he also had reference to the boar in the game room. And I want to say there may have been some fish. I don't think there were, though. I think that the animal reference was to the mice. And if he had made that movie, instead of it being one of his early films, one of his later films, those mice may have been claymation, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So reflecting on the movie in its entire... Go ahead.
No, I think you're dead on. I was just chuckling to myself about the mice's claymation. I don't know that he would have budgetarily been able to do that with Tenenbaums.
No, I agree.
But yeah, for sure.
He didn't have the money at that point, and he didn't have the liberty. I mean, he hadn't made any money on a film, I don't believe, until the Royal Tenenbaums.
Rushmore did okay, but he was still small.
Okay. And then that was his breakthrough, and that led him, you sent me the breakdown of his films, the budget, and then the actual gross. And I didn't realize, because it's not my favorite Wes Anderson film, how popular the Grand Budapest Hotel was. For the budget, I think he did 3 or 4 times gross box office than the movie cost, and that probably will help him make as many films as he ever wants. His films now are going to be in the positive. They're not going to be Hollywood positive, which of course is 3 times the amount of the cost to make the film plus the marketing budget. I didn't realize how big that film was. I like that film, but internationally it must have done really well.
Yeah, I think it was probably international. It's he's remarkably, if I'm a studio executive, he's remarkably consistent. Other than Life Aquatic, which bombed, that was his biggest budget. He had $50 million reportedly by Box Office Mojo, only made $35 million. But everything else is remarkably consistent. But yeah, Grand Budapest reported budget 25, made $175 million. Holy crap!
Yeah, and if you remember that film, he uses a lot of very, like you said, the hotel rooms were very ornate, but a lot of the backdrops were fake, and that was part of the style of the film. And so it wasn't a very expensive movie because you really weren't, you were in train cars. You had a few bigger shots like the chase scene through the museum. A lot of it was centered around being in the hotel. And if you can throw in a few fake backdrops, that makes it a hell of a lot cheaper movie.
Well, not only that, I feel like it's part of his aesthetic. It's almost like a pastiche. He does the same thing in French Dispatch, which I haven't really come around on yet. But it's like you said, it's almost like it is a staged play.
Right. It's a staged play represented in film format or in a movie. Well, look, having said that, and to wrap up, your final thoughts about Asteroid City within, the second watching. Did it speak to you differently? Do you like it more or less? And then as part of the collective, the filmography of one Wes Anderson.
I would say that I like it more than I liked it the first time. And as you recall, I liked it plenty okay the first time. I think Wes's movies for me are kind of like the Edward Norton character in Fight Club. They're very clever. They're amusing. I don't know that they're important necessarily, but they are a wonderful little pastime. I like references as much as he does. And I think he's knocking up against a wall of artistic statement, but it doesn't always work for me, and that's okay.
Well, and that's what I found in the second movie as well, that he has a certain way of expressing himself. You know what you're going to get. And it reminded me, and now I'm forgetting his name, and I should probably write these things down. Who is your... you like this guy a hell of a lot more than I do. For A Few Good Men, A Few Good Men, the writer, what's his name? David...
Sorkin, Aaron Sorkin.
David, right. Aaron Sorkin. When you watch an Aaron Sorkin movie or an Aaron Sorkin television show, you know what you're going to get. He follows very, very faithfully the same paces in the way the dialogue is laid out, the way it's presented by the characters, the types of scenes the characters engage in. I think Wes Anderson, of course, it's a very different voice, but it's the same, right? You know he's going to hit these certain paces throughout the course of the film. I found the second movie, I apologize, I found the second viewing of the movie, Asteroid City, to be much more profound than I did the first viewing. I think that, and I really feel that he was going for this, it was intentional, that he wanted throughout the course of the film for you to quote unquote fall asleep and then wake up. And then he tried to put you to sleep again and then wake up. That the awe that we feel in the experience of going to a movie is in fact giving ourselves over to it and falling asleep, even if we're not completely bought in to everything that's going on. The actors have to keep telling the stories, and sometimes we as viewers have to keep watching the material. And maybe this is more profound for me than it is for you, because as you know, from the years and years that we've watched television shows and movies, I'm routinely a skeptic throughout the course of a television show or a movie. I can't fall asleep. I don't buy it. The music is out of place. The dialogue is bad. The lighting is piss poor. The characters are poorly written. It's poorly directed. It's poorly edited. And I notice these things throughout the course of the show or the movie. And I don't fall asleep. And he's basically, in some sense, saying, go ahead and try and fall asleep. Even if it's McDonald's. Right? It's McDonald's art. There's some value on occasion to having some McDonald's.
Agreed. And the things that you're saying, that's why I'll watch this again, Pat. A, because I do think that there's more there and it hasn't really opened up for me yet. B, this movie's a good hang. It looks great. The cinematography is gorgeous. And it is clever. And because of that, I'll try it again to see if I can get to where you are.
That's fair. And I may very well try it again, because it does have, in my mind, you could put it in that category of inherent vice, where every time you watch it, certain things may open up to you that not only speak more to the content of the film, the character development, what have you, but then it does reflect more as a piece of art on art itself. It makes you challenge, if not appreciate, how you view art in its totality. Well, Jason, I really appreciate you coming on the show again. It's a pleasure, and perhaps we're going to have to, if at least Hollywood can produce as much, given that there's the writer's strike and now the actor strike, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of new content coming online in the next 6, 8, 12 months. Perhaps we pick out other films that maybe both of us haven't seen, and we do this again very soon.
That would be an awesome exercise.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Act 2 Epilogue.
If there's a movie that any listener finds compelling, part of their top 5 list of their favorite movies, please let me know. I haven't seen every movie that's out there, that's for sure. And as someone who has been skeptical, is probably the best word, skeptical of Hollywood, I would like to start opening up, exploring some other movies, maybe some other genres, and perhaps I can review those movies with my buddy, maybe with you, on this podcast. As much as movies, as much as music, television, these things are entertainment. They are also, at their core, art. And they can have a profound influence on us, even though consciously we don't often realize that. I'm pretty available on the social medias, and you can also reach me at thisiswhyidon'tvotepodcast@gmail.com. Let the suggestions begin. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.